Hi, everyone. This is Daniel Williams, Senior Editor at MGMA and host of the MGMA Podcast Network. Today, we're looking at a couple of different topics in our podcast channel. One of those is women in healthcare. Another one is healthcare leadership. Today with us today is Adrienne Lloyd. She's with Optimize Healthcare. She's also an MGMA consultant. She's also been a frequent guest of the MGMA Podcast Network, and she's going to take on a more prominent role in the future by leading the Women in Healthcare podcast, and that will, at many times, will dovetail into the leadership podcast as well. So first of all, I've given everybody a lot of information. Adrienne, I want to welcome you to the show first, and then we'll talk about that a little bit.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So you and I have been planning this just to give people some background. We first had discussions about this. I'm almost embarrassed to say, but not really. Is longer than a year ago. We first started just talking about it and just the way life is and our work lives, our personal lives. There was just so much going on for both of us. It was difficult to find the right time to do it. And sometimes the right time is you just have to make it the right time. So I think with us turning the page to a new year coming up, this is a great time. So you had initially pitched a leadership podcast to me. I countered that and I said, what about women in healthcare? We've had several episodes of that. You and I have had multiple conversations. So let's just share some of that information. What are your thoughts initially about women in healthcare as a podcast, as a format, and then we can lean into the leadership side of that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm so grateful to be here. I think women in healthcare, there continues to be expanded roles, and obviously we need everyone in healthcare, regardless of any, distinguishing factor. But I think from women in healthcare, there definitely is a unique trajectory and unique situations that many of us face. And I do think there's a lot of stories that are there to be shared, both from, overcoming obstacles to just really, functioning in different roles as people have grown and expanded their leadership capacity and finding different paths. So I'm hoping we'll be able to have, or we're planning to have lots of different types of input and people who've taken, different paths along the way, different journeys, and being able to share. Ultimately, we want to have a platform where people are able to share experiences they've had in such a way that they're going to be able to help inspire anyone, any leader, anyone who's looking to become a leader, and hopefully just continue from there. So.
Yeah, that is really exciting. And one of the things I went and looked it up yesterday, we've done about 8 episodes so far with this Women in Healthcare series. And they've varied. And Adrienne and I talked about this offline. In some interviews that we had here, if y'all have heard those, you might recall, it leaned in heavily to, I am a woman. This is the path that I had. This is very distinctly a trajectory that my career took on, and that was forged because I'm a woman. There have been others that I interviewed a woman, but we didn't lean as heavily into that. We just talked about being a leader in healthcare, and in many of those, both of those ideas were covered. And so I'm excited to see where you're going to take this, Adrienne, as we pass the torch, so to speak, here. Any other thoughts before we have our final Women in Healthcare interview with me being the interviewer, you being the guest here, before you sit on the other in the other chair here and do the interviewing? So any other thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
No, I think we'll work on some, processes, of course. And as you know, my process improvement background, we got to have some structure in place, but we'll work on, kind of a process for people to both apply and maybe nominate others to be, on the podcast. So if you are listening or you have a story to share, know others that you think would be really, impactful for others to hear, we'll work on getting that kind of publicly available so people can submit requests and kind of go through. But we do I agree with you. We want to have a variety of of topics so that people can really see lots of different angles of not just being a woman, of course, but being in healthcare, period, and being a leader in healthcare as we all continue to face challenges. I think as we'll dive into. I've been in healthcare a little over 25 years, and I often say we all have the same experiences. We're all special, but we're not so unique in terms of whether you're in a small practice to a big institution. It really is about your people and your processes and how you're working through those to create engagement. So I fully believe that every story that's shared here will be able to resonate with many, many people. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll delve into this. I know some of our faithful listeners have probably heard you on here before, but it's interesting. Every time I interview, I learn more about you and your background, the things you're working on. So let's dig into that a little bit, Adrienne. So share a little bit of that personal journey and experiences that you've had that have led you to eventually take you to the role that you're in now as a healthcare consultant and expert.
Sure. Yeah, and I think many of us will resonate with this. As it's not a path I would have projected. So it's just kind of, you find your way. So I am from a very small town originally in North Carolina. I had lots of interactions with healthcare growing up, from my own personal journey to my grandparents and other family members and so forth. So healthcare was always going to be a part and will always be a part of who I am and what I do. I started my career in my postgraduate fellowship at Mayo Clinic, was able to work there with a variety of specialties and leadership roles, kind of really creating operational change. Some very big jobs very early in my career that I often felt overwhelmed and sometimes underqualified for. So I'm sure some of that will come out as we go through the podcast series, and kind of those things will resonate. I think there's always a little bit of that. I hate to say fake it till you make it, because I don't really believe that's what I did. I don't believe that's what many do. I think it's about answering, asking questions, getting in there, looking at information, asking for input, watching the providers and the OR, whatever it is you need to do to kind of learn. And through those experiences, you identify different scenarios and you start to connect the dots of here's how things work. And if we did this here, it can work like that there. And so but I've had some amazing experience. So I was at Mayo Clinic for 10 years in a variety of specialties, in Minnesota for 4, where I froze, and in Arizona where I burned up. But and I was at Duke Health for 7 years working with ophthalmology, and was able there to do a lot of change transformation. Actually, all of my roles, you probably heard me on one of the other series talk about, I often found myself in positions of really trying to create change and turnarounds in organizations, and a lot of great people trying to do the right things, but without perhaps cohesive vision and structure and just engaged processes to get there. And so was very fortunate to be able to partner with some great physician leaders and great administrative leaders to really drive those changes, which of course created not only financial and operational results, but decreased our turnover, increased the physician satisfaction, and all of those things. Both my parents also are teachers. So I started speaking about a little over 15 years ago. I think I just recently did my 82nd, and this may actually be my 83rd speaking engagement or presentation.
Wow.
And
wow.
And it's funny, we had my graduate school reunion a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about our capstone course where we had to present this big business plan. And I just was thinking back to how terrified I was. So that in itself has been another journey, which I'm, I still have moments of panic and what am I going to say and what comes out. But, it's all been a journey. And so I love the teaching process. I love the consulting, going into consulting has been fantastic, because I've loved to be able to kind of get to meet different people, different practices. As I said, we all have very similar experiences in many different ways, but being able to kind of go in there and help partner with them to understand what they're working through and what they're trying to change has been fantastic. And then being able to take and share those stories, both as a consultant, as a speaker, and then I also work as a business and executive coach. And so being able to really partner with all of those people has just been a great gift. And I think more than anything, and as you know, I'm working on a book, so that will come out at some point, hopefully in 2024. And it really is focused around, just I think a lot of us as leaders can feel it can be a very lonely job, and we do all the right things
Right.
to get our team, with us and bring them along, but really hoping to help people kind of think about that in a different way so that there's not as much opportunity for leadership burnout. And because I do want all of us who are really trying to do the right thing to be able to continue on that leadership journey and create the biggest impacts that we can and not feel exhausted every day when we go home. So
Right.
hopefully we can highlight some success stories as we go through this to be able to share with that. But
Yeah. And
personal side, I'm also a mom, 11 and 8-year-old, so that's its own own adventure, but it's great.
that is wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that information. And I will put another shameless plug in there. Just in the last 24 hours, you also turned in a chapter to a new MGMA book that we're really excited about, that our fingers are crossed that will be published in 2024, and it will be available by the Leaders Conference in October, which will be here in Denver. So we're really excited about that. So thank you for working so closely with MGMA on so many different types of projects. So thank you for that. Let's project outward then. So we were getting a little bit about Adrienne. We're getting that personal journey, some of the things that led you to where you are right now. But let's talk about some of the challenges that leaders face in general in healthcare, and how they can overcome those challenges. What are some of the ones when you're working with practices, when you're also working as a coach to other leaders? What are some of those pain points that you're seeing time and time again, and how do you help them resolve some of those problems?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I've often said this too, is the only constant in healthcare is change. And
Yeah.
so I think that is just continues to be both being aware of the changes that are needed and being able to keep up with the changes that are needed and really drive the change in your organization. Like it's just an overwhelming amount of information, of details, of things that need to occur. And so I think that's and while it's not, people outside of the healthcare industry, business, leaders also have many changes coming their way as well. And sometimes in some ways more rapidly than we do, but there's just so many dynamics. And of course, the last few years, employee retention, now provider retention is, the very, very big challenges. People had to increase the salaries over the last, 2 years to really retain employees. And then now, as they've had regulatory reimbursement impacts, that's created further squeezes on finances that are creating still gaps in terms of margins and improvements that they need. And as well as there's still retention and recruitment issues, and depending on what I've found is it varies depending on what market you're in, what type of organization you have. Some people are struggling more with kind of that frontline, access, check-in areas. Others are struggling more to find kind of those qualified, specialized clinical team members. And even if they're able to recruit a nurse, if they're in a cardiology practice, it may be a nurse who's spent most of her career in oncology and doesn't really understand cardiology per se, let alone cardiology working with those specific physicians inside those IT structures and processes and all the stuff that comes with, as we know, there's just still so much uniqueness in, practice delivery. So I think really being able to just understand the changes is going to be there, but really working to create the vision with your team, the vision for yourself, for your organization, what the priorities are, and being able to bring the team along with that. Because I know as we talk about, retention and recruitment, I think regardless of generation, people want to feel that they understand what success looks like in their job. They want to know what that looks like, what that feels like, what's expected of them. And then they also want to feel like valued and recognized in a way that they're contributing to the overall goals. So I think at the heart of it, if you can manage to get clear yourself, create clarity with your team, and then create that engagement and kind of continuous improvement value, the culture where people feel like they get to give input and feel valued, that can really get you hopefully 80% of the way there. So.
Right. I want to shift gears to a topic that everybody's very familiar with at this point, and that is burnout. But I want to talk about it in a couple of different ways. I was being very transparent with you offline that one of the things that can help alleviate some levels of burnout is the utilization of technology. I was very open with you that I have begun using in the podcast process, and I'm going to be
Yeah.
talking with you as you're going to be hosting these now. I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I do. You can use them, don't use them, but I'll share with people that I will take some information and run it through AI and just see what it gives me back. And then it might get in the ballpark. It might nail it. It might, require me going back and editing it, but it saves me a heck of a lot of time. I might stare at a blank sheet of paper like, what am I going to ask this person, and go through all that information. And it could save me as much as 30 minutes per interview and that's a conservative estimate. And if I'm doing 3 interviews a week, we're talking about I've just saved myself potentially an hour and a half a week. So I wanted to talk with you. You don't have to go down the burnout, I mean, the technology side of it, but just when healthcare professionals are facing burnout in record numbers right now, what are some ways that they can prioritize, that self-care
Yeah.
and that well-being to just help them do their jobs better and feel better inside as well?
Yeah. No, I think it's very real. And I've also gone down the technology rabbit hole. So it's great. It's here to stay, regardless of what you feel about AI. It's not going anywhere. So
Yeah,
figuring out where and when to use it, is always, I think, going to be something
right.
in the next like 3 years is going to be really, really significant for healthcare. But in terms of burnout, and I have been there, as I mentioned. I've had roles where I've been leading lots of change, and even early on in my career where I wasn't even sure if how much we needed to change. You're diving into the details,
Right.
you're figuring out the problems, you're trying to figure out where to go. And I've spent, I've had 60-hour weeks, I've had 80-hour weeks, and sometimes multiple weeks in a row. And I also know that I've been at times not the best role model for my team because I was trying to do those things. So
Yeah.
that's not what I want for leaders out there. And I do think that it first comes with, often, so there's the time that we work that then we eventually don't have enough time and energy for the things outside of our personal life, or, outside of our professional life that we want to have. So that's one aspect of burnout, right? Like you truly just don't have time and energy to do anything else. But the other piece is, within your work, your career, your organization, I find, when you're doing things that you feel like you're really contributing at your highest level, you're in your kind of genius zone, so to speak. And most of the time as leaders, it's depending on what position you're in, you're doing things that no one else in your organization can do, right? Like none of your team members can do. You're ideally at the point where you're able to focus on the strategy, those higher level tasks. But really that starts first with getting, clear and a better understanding where your strengths are, because we can't be good at every single thing. And one of them, as you mentioned, using something to help you come up with questions. Like I love personality assessments. I might be a bit of a junkie, and none of them are perfect, but I feel like you can always learn something.
Right.
And one of the ones I took, I guess 7 years ago, was a Hogan assessment. It was created by GE in the 80s. It's pretty intensive. But one of the things it talked about with me was, it became very clear, I'm a much better editor than I am initial writer. I can be a really good writer, but it takes me a long time to actually sit down and generate initial content. So like even appreciating that in a different way about myself when I was, particularly, I think it really came through when I was at Duke. We were trying to really expand our communication, not only within our organization as a, ophthalmology, cert eye center, but also our public communication to, trying to increase our rankings, trying to, be a better communicator within the whole like Duke enterprise. And I was fortunate to work with a great communications and publication, PR director, and she was able to, even having her like draft an initial something I could edit, made a huge amount of impact. And I was able to keep things moving more efficiently than if I was trying to create it all myself. So I think that's where if we try to be everything all at once, as leaders, we can find ourselves stuck in some of those things that are not our best use of our time, best use of our energy. And so when you can kind of take a step back, assess what you really are great at, identify team members that may love doing that thing that you don't like so much, or maybe you struggle a little bit more to do, and you can really start to build that just kind of that consistency, cohesiveness across the group. You can move. A, it makes it more fun, and B, you can move faster. So I think that is a huge part of it. And as you mentioned, we're writing this book together, so we definitely talk in there as well about ways to increase employee engagement and just really get them on the same page, and different programs that you can offer to help individuals think differently about work-life balance. And I like to think of it as work-life integration, honestly, just balance, because I think it just ebbs and flows so much. But I think creating a more open conversations with your team about what's important to them, both professional growth wise, like what do they want to achieve, but also personally. Like I've worked with, I do team groups and coaching sometimes. And one of the ones I worked with, I had a leader who said, I haven't been to my son's baseball games in like the last 3 years because just stuff happens at work. I'm here. And actually someone who reported to her said, what, how do we help you? How do we get you there? Like, we want to work with you to support you to get there. And it was just so, nice for her to be able, I think I could just see the weight come off her shoulders. Just, I haven't spoken with him in a while. I don't know if she's actually made it yet, but even just knowing that her team, she could say it out loud and her team could hear her and appreciate it. It gives them also an opportunity to be able to share like, hey, this is really important to me. And I think creating that environment where people get to be people and not just, team members, I think it's huge. And so.
Yeah, I do think that's one of the really good things about the workforce. I started working in the late 80s actually, and a lot has changed since then, because it was, a lot of real top-down type organizations back in the day. And I'm not going to say it was frowned upon, so to speak, to go to your kids, soccer or baseball game or whatever it might be. But there's certainly an openness to it now, where you want a motivated and engaged workforce. You want people to be enjoying their lives outside of work, so they can also, hopefully enjoy it at the workplace as well. I wanted to ask you about that. Are there some effective ways you've seen where you can promote inclusivity, you can create supportive environments? We're already talking about it. We're like, hey, how do we support you so you can go to juniors, soccer match or whatever it might be? What are some things you've seen work with the practices you've worked with?
I think just having the intentional conversation, and obviously, having an intentional conversation about what's important to the individual, and then also in line with, obviously, the job's got to get done. Like, we've got to take care of the patients. So having the conversations, opening that door to say, we want to create an organization where things are, more consistent, like it's predictable most of the time about when we're going to get out. If we can make arrangements for people to have time away, or we can make arrangements for flexible schedule or work remotely, all of those things, like we want to do that. We just have to work together to figure out how that can work. And so I think if you have those discussions, kind of that environment there, that's fantastic start. And then there are realities of, what changes do you need to make in terms of workflows and, processes, and just how things are functioning to be able to achieve that. And that's where I think as you know, I'm Lean Six Sigma. I've been doing that since, I'm aging myself today, but 08. I think I love the process improvement tools. You can create great results, but I think the biggest thing that I do love about it is using even something as simple as brainstorming and creating that platform to get input into ideas of, hey, this isn't working, or hey, we can't, we're consistently running till 6 p.m., 6:30, every Wednesday or 3 days a week, whatever it is. And being able to break down like, well, why is that? Well, okay, it's this provider, we don't have the right resources, the patients are getting bottlenecked, or, we need to kind of restructure how we've got things, or maybe we need some more staffing on that day, whatever those things are. creating an environment where you can get input from the team. And as we talked about, we particularly don't want the leaders to be burned out, because if they are struggling, then of course the rest of the team will too. And I think a lot of times what happens as a leader is you're trying to carry the weight of the organization on your shoulders. The problems that are coming ahead in terms of regulatory reimbursement, all the stuff we talked about. And we try to protect our team a little bit. It's not that we want to scare them, but we also try to hold maybe too much. And when we can just start to have those like vulnerable, transparent conversations of, hey, like, I know there's a group that I'm working with, and they're a surgical practice. They've been pretty insulated in the market they're in, doing very well, but they've got a competitor that's potentially coming into the market pretty soon. And so being able to share that with the team in this way that says, like, we're going to be okay. We're going to figure this out, but we're going to have to improve on customer service. We're going to have to think differently about which types of patients we bring in. Having those discussions then allows you to create structures and processes that help the organization, the patient flow and everything work more easily, so you can then create more of that balance in just collegiality and collaboration with your group. So
I have a final question for you. You and we broke down, because I sent you so many questions, because AI generated a lot of questions, more than I would usually ask. And so we've had to kind of hop around and find things. And that's the cool thing in talking with you and just having a conversation with someone, is just seeing where the conversation goes. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here today is really finding that right balance. You were just talking about your kids, if I remembered correctly, 11 and 8. Is that correct? Somewhere in that range?
Good. Yes, you're good.
Oh boy, I win a star today.
You too.
But it's such and I've got a 19-year-old, and we both have shared, some of those stories. My daughter's away at college, and it happens so fast. Everybody who's listening who has kids, they're going, holy moly, it's like, when can we like just bottle this, because you don't want it to go away, but you also want to have them grow up and be successful in their own ways. But what is that advice? Do you have some specific examples, anything that you've shared as a coach, as a consultant, anything else in helping some of those leaders out there strike that work-life balance where we say the word balance, but we don't think about it. But if you like visualize somebody standing on, like a tightrope, walking across it or something, or walking across a log that's fallen across a creek, and you don't want to fall in. And so how do you find that balance where you're in balance, walking across, as opposed to plunging into the water? How do you do that?
Well, and that's, if you think about any of those visuals, right, just as you said,
Yeah.
standing on a tightrope, standing on a, balance beam, or on a seat in the middle of the fulcrum of the seesaw, like none of those are stable, right? Like it's fluid, like you're going to have to continuously be adjusting. So I think just knowing that, like, there is no perfect answer is a good place to start. But one of the things that I do with most of the groups that I work with, particularly if we're trying to create strategic change, or if I'm working as a coach, is honestly, again, it's around like clarity and getting clear. I think a lot of times we do visioning, we do strategy, we only focus on the professional side if we're doing it as a team. And I think what I like to do is say, if you had looking ahead, thinking today, what's working, what's not working, personally and professionally. And, personally, it may include things like, if you have a significant other, it may be that relationship, it may be relationship, friends, family. I know there were periods in my career where we were driving change. I was working so much that between work and my kids, and, there wasn't a lot of time for anything else. So I didn't have lunch with friends. I had one friend from college that actually lives here in Chapel Hill, and I don't think I had lunch with her for 2 years because, it just, and that wasn't what I would love to have happened, but it is sometimes it's going to look differently. But defining what do you want those things to look like personally? What are a couple of things that are really important to you? And then as well, doing that with your team, professionally, like, what are you trying to create together? What are those goals? And, ideally having 3 to 5 goals. I think that's a lot of things that we do too, is we pick 10 to 14. And I know, as I get so excited, so many ideas, like, oh gosh, that'd be great, we can do all this. And ultimately you're just not going to get there. So no, it's a journey. Trust that it's a journey. I do agree the kids are going to grow up so fast. And I think I think being aware too, as you and I both have talked about, like we've gotten much more into the mindset and energy type discussions over the last few years. And I think part of it's about your time and how much time you're spending in those areas that you want, but a lot of it has to do with your energy. If you're really able to, when you leave the office and you get home, are you able to really connect with those things, either those people or other hobbies or passions that you have in a meaningful way, and so that you still have things that light you up and re-energize you when you come back to the office the next week. And then I think just continuously evaluating that, at least, if not bare minimum, every 6 months, ideally, quarterly and even monthly check-ins, just like, how am I doing? And not being judgmental with yourself about it, but just saying like, okay, yep, I'm doing good here. I need to focus a little bit more there. Maybe it's a health, something you're trying to, drink more water or whatever it might be. But, just know there's a lot going on. You've got a lot on your plates. Setting those priorities is very important. Understanding, as we talked about, your strengths, so that you're focusing as much as you can in those things that you're really adding the most value and are more of your genius areas. I think it really, really is a great place to start. And then just continuing and asking for feedback, making others aware of what you're trying to work towards and getting their feedback on, is there anything you should do? I love to ask the question, is there anything that you're doing that you should stop doing, both individually as a leader, individually maybe as a human, and then also as your team? What are we doing that just doesn't make sense anymore? We'll love getting rid of stuff. So if you can do any of that, that's great too. But I think be kind, be gentle with yourself. And that's one thing I'm still learning to do. So
we all are. All are. Well, that is a great way to end this conversation. So we are so glad, again, as we led with this conversation today, Adrienne is going to take a lead role in hosting the Women in Healthcare podcast. And it's a swan song for me, but I think I think this is great. It's something we've been trying to do for a long time, is to get more hosts, just to get a variety of voices on here, and then people can explore conversations from different sides. So it could be really cool here. So we're excited about that. We're going to keep everybody in the loop on when that will be rolling out. So soon. And so stay tuned. Well, Adrienne, thank you again for joining us, and we will be talking again soon, of course.
Thank you for having me. Excited.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for this episode of Women in Healthcare. Thanks again to Adrienne Lloyd for joining us. Again, we're so excited that she's going to take this prominent role here on these MGMA podcasts. And thanks to all of y'all for being faithful listeners to the MGMA Podcast Network.